lightning talk is to present you the past, present and future of film and video preservation through digitization. Possibly I will spend also a few words on restoration, on resolution, sampling and bit depth. But before I start, it's my pleasure to remember that on the 4th April of this year, the divided States of America's Department of Government Efficiency decided to show all of humanity its profound stupidity. This, of course, is the Handbook for Film Archives, edited by FIAF in Thai. It presents the knowledge from almost half a century ago. Many of the best practices described in this book are still valid today, others have been modified or obliterated. Instead of considering the entire collection, which is often impossible in the real world, many times we have suggested first analyzing a subset of the stocked items and then applying statistical methods to create a synthesis of collected data. Items include photochemical film reels, magnetic tape reels, cartridges, cassettes, you name it. And the value, 80% plus minus 5%, gives usually enough precision to the archive to establish a solid preservation plan. This graph by the IPI was shown again and again and again. It summarizes the decomposition of photochemical film and magnetic tapes on cellulose acetate base, but the principle of applying to any hydrolytic decomposition process. If you invest all the money in conservation, then you delay the chemical decomposition, you smooth the curve and push away the autocatalysis further away on the time axis. But you cannot stop it, you can only delay it. And in the long term, you will lose the complete collection. If you invest all the money in photochemical duplication, then apart of losing some photographic quality with each generation, you can preserve quickly a certain number of items, but you lose all the rest. Therefore, it is necessary to find a good compromise between the money spent on conservation and the money spent on duplication in order to preserve the biggest number of items possible in the long term. The statistical approach presented in the previous slide gives us how much of the collection is situated where in this graph. And of course, there are various ISO standards telling us at which temperature and relative humidity we should store the items. And this period has been best summarized by Dave Rice 12 years ago. How this can be realized? Only little has been published about planning, designing and building vaults for archives. Actually, I know only this good book that comes from the land down under. On one role or another, I have participated in the planning and realization of numbers of archives for audiovisual. For the sake of the time, I include here only this schema, which illustrates a real-world compromise on how air conditioning system can be operated in terms of efficiency versus building and especially running costs. Meanwhile, Kodak became aware of the preservation challenges of photochemical film. At that time, many believed that only film was a safe medium for preserving any moving image, not the digital route was, even if the digital route was already taken by the broadcast people. And again, Dave Rice summarized in a good way this kind of ideas that were around at that time. Dominic Hayes wrote an outstanding manual. In the second edition, he included the digital intermediate workflow, which is still used in almost any case when an archive claims to show you a celluloid print. First of all, the probability that the projected print is actually on celluloid, which is cellulose acetate plasticide with camphor, is almost 0%. Secondly, what you see in the projection on the cinema screen is an analog representation of a digital file and not a photochemical print. The full photochemical route is today almost dead, and Dave told us yesterday why it is essential to keep this unique experience alive. You already saw this book as background of one of my last year presentation slides. It is based on Anil Kokkaran PhD thesis at Cambridge, and almost everybody uses Anil Kokkaran's work, but almost nobody gives him credit. By the way, since 1998, he is working here next door at the Trinity College, and I am very happy that he is here in the room today. Welcome. The world is a small one, and I met Anil Kokkaran first at this meeting in London. And for me, this meeting was a very important one, not only because I met you, but also because I learned a lot during this conference. And for example, my doubts about JPEG 2000 were confirmed. This gathering was organized by Paul Reed at the BFI for FIRST. This was a film restoration and conservation strategy, a project by the European Union. If I am not completely wrong, this is the first book by Charles Poynton. He was a very important figure in the definition of digital standards from the camera via the post-production to the projection. In particular, he was instrumental in the definition of HD format, and he imposes the square pixels. Yes, rectangular pixels existed in the good old times. And this is a very recent publication which has a lot to do with No Time to Wait. A disclaimer, my review of this book should be published in FIA's Journal of Film Preservation. And finally, I'm so happy that young people continue to explore also the old stuff. Here, for instance, Ashley Flower. I have tried to summarize 3 points each: the preservation of analog items and the preservation of digital items. I consider neither the photochemical duplication of elements nor the duplication of magnetic tapes in these slides. The photochemical duplication has become extremely expensive and gives good results inside the standard Eastman color world, because the range of the different raw film types is very limited today. So we cannot copy in a good way elements that are not Eastman color based. And for the sake of the time, I skip some slides about formats, and I go to some recommendations. I share one thought on 3 topics. Regarding the digitization of photochemical film, please set realistic goals for yourselves. Goals that you can actually achieve, and keep the long-term perspective in mind, so you can adapt and change on changing circumstances. This actually applies to both climatic condition in the storage walls and for the photochemical elements, and the type of file format chosen for the master elements. As part of my classes, there is also a week-long workshop, and starting from a given scenario, students must imagine and plan an archive, and this archive has to be functional even if overnight 50% of funding, staff, and so on is cut. So it's a very interesting exercise. You have to plan an archive that can be scaled up and down because it applies every time. And on restoration, as far as restoration is concerned, I am sorry. I believe the battle is almost lost. I hope I am wrong. Frankly, there is only a little around that constitutes a restoration in the classic sense. Usually, a new, corrected, improved version is created, and the use of AI is often a mess. Not always, but often. Of course, this all is allowed, but please, please, please don't call it a restoration. And I will end my lightning talk with two examples illustrating what a digital restoration is not. There is a guy who restores the images that the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum posts daily on social media. I warned him that if he kills a second time on one of my relatives of blessed memory, I would curse him until death. He modified the wording and now calls his work digitally enhanced and colorized. And this example is a mess of what AI can achieve. Look, for example, at the position and size of the pupils. And that, with that beautiful look in the future, thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions? I think we have time for maybe one or two.
Repeat.
Sure. Shortly, you give bad examples of AI, I think intentionally. But my experience is that as any instrument, you need to find the right instrument. Also, I make some kind of restoration of old movie, and it make the faces like new conversational people from today. But if you find the right model, it make very good and absolutely conforming to original. It means that the model should be trained with the archival material because most of current models are trained from digitally born today material. For that reason, you can have some modernization of the sense. So I think that next time you will have selected the right model and show how good can be restored with the AI.
I did actually exactly the contrary. Last year I presented on what ways to achieve a good result. So it's a model that we train internally and we use our own restorations. We have not the artifacts that I have shown you here because we control exactly what it's done, and it's done only with our material and with our ethic of restoration. But it's not what the majority of the people in the archives wish to receive.
Do we have any other questions? And I would say thank you so much, Reginald. up, we have Adam Gerard and Irla McGowan with Take Control of Your Digitization, bringing digitization in-house.
Hello, my name is Alan Gerard, and my colleague here, Irla McGowan, and we work at the Irish Traditional Music Archive. We'll be talking today about essentially building some digitization labs and doing our own work in-house rather than sending materials out to vendors. This is really about what we've learned and in some ways a caution that it may not be an approach that suits every institution. So the presentation really does outline that there's a lot of work involved in building a digitization studio. We have very generously been funded to build first an audio digitization lab and more recently a video lab. So we're digitizing a lot of materials in-house, and it does come with a lot of different challenges. I'll talk a little bit about what those challenges are and go through some of the background in designing the labs, and here we'll talk more about the human side and the training and workflows that come along with getting the work done. Before I do that, a little bit about the Irish Traditional Music Archive. We are the largest collection of Irish traditional music, song, and dance in the world. We hold materials in many, many different formats. So paper manuscripts, handwritten scores, audio recordings, videos, ephemera, you name it, we've got it. So we're sort of the institution of record for this particular subject. We serve a lot of different customers or patrons. So it might be musicians coming in to learn obscure tunes, could be video production houses working on a documentary, researchers writing books, and we're actually around the corner, and we're open to the public, and we don't require appointments or anything like that, so we welcome everybody in. So, you know, we all know, I think, why digitization as part of a preservation program makes sense, but the reasons why to do it in-house are a little bit more nuanced, I think. So, in particular, you know, you have things in common like minimizing the handling of materials that are decaying actively, but you know, other considerations in terms of building the labs, really, we want to be more in control of the process, and we want to build the skills to do this work ourselves, which I think is something as audiovisual archivists we should strive to do rather than always farming it out. Now, there are obviously reasons that you might want to send out this kind of work, but sometimes the results are not that great. And I've definitely found that, particularly here in Ireland, where we're a small market, there aren't a lot of vendors. we've had very costly sort of prices for doing the work, and we've ended up with a lot of transfers that I didn't think were good enough. So these were some of the motivations for wanting to try doing it ourselves. Just to give you an idea about our holdings, this is a rough number of what we have, most of which is stored outside of our building in purpose-built storage that we do contract for. But we're actively out recording as well, which is unusual for an archive, making field recordings, and we have more material coming in all the time. In particular, I expect that video is going to grow a lot. So just about every week I get a phone call about somebody with 300 VHS tapes that they want to donate. And those numbers add up quick. I won't go too far into all the formats that we can handle, but we've calculated that between analog and digital audio formats, depending on how you count, if you include different quarter-inch track layouts and speeds, we're up to probably close to 20 formats that we can handle. We can do disc-based materials, quarter-inch tape, and all the common digital formats, obviously cassettes as well. Recently, in preparation for the building the video lab, we did a survey of all our formats, identified the most common ones. So there's a list of those there. Now comes the fun part. So we're in a Georgian builder, and spaces in terms of the environment are challenging for both storage of these materials and digitization. We have managed to eke out some space, but yeah, when designing these labs, it's a huge amount of work that goes into it up front. You need to consider the physical space, what the carriers are like, you know, the devices that you'll need for playback, which becomes increasingly challenging, as I'm sure everybody knows. I've been stockpiling machines for quite a while now. And then, you know, further down the chain, what you're going to use for the A to D conversion, what output formats you wish to collect, and long-term storage, both for the analog original carriers and for the digital files. Obviously, when you start building labs for digitization, then you know the number of files that you're creating balloons quite quickly, and we're up to a footprint of, I believe, close to 200 terabytes now. So for an organization where we're, I believe, a staff of 12, that's pretty sizable, and managing that is a challenge. I won't go too far into this, but we are required to follow public procurement rules, and this is a huge amount of work. Ended up being far more work than I would have anticipated up front, and this is just really to highlight that there are a lot of hidden costs that we often wouldn't associate with, you know, the planning and the build of these studios. But now we get to the fun part. So here we've got a before picture of a colleague's office that got turned into our video digitization setup. Here's the setup. And so it looks more or less like that now, without all the bits spread out over the desk. We did bring in somebody else with expertise to help source machines and do installation for us, but the layout was designed together for this lab, and we decided to just focus on, I believe it's the 10 most common video formats. So we do send out other formats that come up more rarely in our collections to vendors routinely as well. This is an even bigger project. So this is kind of in process for our audio digitization lab. It had at one point been a recording studio. So bottom left you can see some sound treatment there, but it was then turned into a storage area for collections because we were out of space, and luckily we were able to turn it back. So this was a huge project, not least because we needed to remove all these collections out of the space during the planning and installation process, and that took a small army of people to make sure that we had locations and inventory control covered for all that material. But also bottom left you can see what the space was like before installation, and bottom right as well. This is a lovely rendering of what we hoped for it to look like. And shockingly, we actually got really close. Now, I could have taken more pictures so you could see all the equipment. I know people here would have appreciated that. But we're lucky also to have stockpiled a lot of playback machines. We've got really amazing acoustic treatment in there. We make new recordings in there as well as digitizing old ones. And it's been running pretty much every day since it was installed. We've digitized quite a lot of material. Every day we're improving the degree to which we can handle materials. We're doing a lot more disc-based materials than we used to. We've got about 10,000 shellac discs that we work with, not to mention LPs, transcription discs. So it's always great to learn more and do more. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm going to just chat a bit about some of the trainings and the expertise in-house, and a general sort of workflow that we go through the day. So I'm going to try to steer my 9 to 5 down to 3 minutes here, which is a bit hard. But also then, once we have digitized the organisation preparation, which goes to getting all materials off my desk to add on to other artists for long-term storage. So in terms of training, my training would have started with Adam here, my joint Adam's experience, previous audiovisual archives. We've also invited different format experts from around the world. So we've had tape-based training events, we've had disc-based training events. So we host some of these people in for a few days at a time, get to pick their brains and kind of interrogate their workflows. One of the exciting bits as well, as part of the funding we received for the lab as well, we're also developing use, so building a background artist. This will be an artist resident space, but also we're open to invite experts from around the world. So I know the cost of living has gone up in Dublin, so they have 2 weeks, maybe one day rent just to live free in Dublin, and we get to pick their brains apart. I don't know if that's a raw deal for them or if that's a good deal for us, but in terms of the actual workflow, so once a collection arrives on my desk, the first thing is to do assessment of the collection. So in a previous life before this, I was 25 years as a traditional musician myself, so I kind of lean on that sort of subject knowledge to do an initial assessment of the collection. So in some cases we have reel-to-reels, for example, with written data of the cartons. So you can identify from those. I have a very good working knowledge of the recorded history of traditional music. So we're interested in preserving unique and at-risk material. So things like radio dubs of commercial recordings. We both can't afford to store that material, and just using the resources upon it isn't efficient. When you're working through collections that are 300, 400 reel-to-reels and maybe 1,000 cassettes, you can't waste time digitizing material, which you probably already hold the original anyway. So a first pass of the external partners, let's say, also we'll do an ongoing assessment of the material as it's being played. So I generally do spot checks on everything that comes across the desk. This both saves time, storage, it also saves wear on the tapes and on the playback machines, which again is important at that point. It's becoming increasingly hard to restore and replace these machines. So once we've identified items for digitization, really what we spend a lot of time doing is making sure that we've calibrated correctly to digitize each of those, whether it's a tape, a disc-based format. So the idea of all this is that minimal handling of the items and that hopefully one tape is enough and you don't have to disturb that item ever again. So in terms of calibration, depending if it's a disc-based media, it could be assessing tracking angles, tracking forces, playback speeds, choosing the correct styles, whether it's width and shape, and so there's an infinite amount of depth that goes into it. With display or sorry, with tape media, it could be adjusting azimuth, again, playback speed. We also recently invested in machinery for cleaning our discs, let's say. So we've had good success with palmitic acid builders on shellac and acetate transcription discs. Also, with our tapes as well, we recently invested in scientific incubator for our tapes. So we're going to get into baking tapes as well. So once we've done, let's say, initial assessment, we'll do a physical assessment of the tapes as well. So any slices that need to be rectified. So traditional musicians or enthusiasts in the past were very bad for trying to attempt their own fixes. So I think my record is about 65 slices on one tape at the moment. So yeah, that was a very fun day. So once we've got the tapes in fit condition to play, we'll then identify formats. So a lot of the time we won't know whether it's quarter track, half track, what speed we're playing at. They don't really have machines which handle all of these. So very easy to figure that out. So once we have digitalized, or sorry, once we have calibrated, the digitalization process is quite simple in the way. Okay, so we're relying on clean power, high quality playback machines, correct calibration, okay? And then when it comes to the actual capture, then we're just looking at pros at the moment. So the idea with this is we're doing this on a bulk-based operation. So we started, I think, with maybe one cassette deck, and then we've gone up to 12 at a time. And maybe you could add 3 or 4 reels in on top of that as well. We also have space to add in more inputs as well. So I think really the average idea number at the moment is 15 different audio sources at one time, which is intense and it takes a lot of content. So very kind of structured and organized monitoring each track as it's going. Okay, so this is one of the areas that we've noticed that done our correct calibration, we've identified formats, but we do have to keep monitoring. That's one of the situations we see where the standard probably drops off. Okay, it's after that. But then also as well, I've said cataloging there, it's not really cataloging. What I'm doing is documenting my workflow. So any changes that have been made to the tape, we'd also identify areas within tapes that we don't want to digitize, maybe could be family recordings, private sensitive material, things like that. So that'll be removed at the time. And also for the catalogers who come later on down the line, I can again rely on my own experience as a traditional musician and do a lot of the legwork there in terms of identifying musicians, identifying particular recordings which are of high interest to us. So, as Adam said, you're generating a huge amount of content. The next big bottleneck is cataloging material. So, what's great about this is that we can create a raw record and keep track of our own collections, even if they haven't been fully catalogued or made accessible to the public. We have researchers or family members who come in looking for performance, and we can say, oh, there is a collection, it's not available, but it's coming in the pipeline. So after that, it's then about organization. So there's physical organization of collections, and then there's the digital side as well. So in terms of physically, let's say there's the original taking out the original cartons placed in buffers, acid-free boxes. All of those boxes, all the reels, they're labeled with unique identifiers, they're scanned, okay. The original boxes are sent off to storage, the new reels are sent off to storage, they're acid-free boxes. The scans travel with the reels as well. So essentially we've created a system where if anything was to ever get separated, it would be very easy to piece back together. Okay, or for whatever reason that a file became corrupted, we could easily recall. So as these boxes are leaving, the barcodes for scan boxes are created, so we have accurate locations where every reporting is. So hopefully we never have to play these tapes ever again, but if we did, we could easily recall them. Then, sort of on the digital side, it sort of represents that structure as well. So we have high resolution tape scans, we'd be exporting 24 to 96 WAV files, master files. We also generate derivative MP3 files for those for user access as well. So they'll all be identified by their unique identifier, stored together. Then they go off my desk and they're sent to a whole area for Adam and the archive team to assess for long-term storage. And then just very quickly, if people are actually interested, this is some of the setup we have with it. So I have to put a short list on. There's a lot more that goes into it. But just in terms of scale we're working on as well, I was very keen to highlight the 12 task family syntax. We're constantly stockpiling. I think people go into us and get a bit, they see another cassette deck that arrived in some of our colleagues and they just wonder where all these machines go on. But yeah, in terms of what we're working with at the moment, we're working with very high quality machinery, but also a high volume output as well. So trying to achieve a kind of combination of very accurate, very thorough work, but also at a very high volume output too. So yeah, I'll just leave that up there and I'll hand you back down. Thanks so much.
So yeah, I mean, as Irla mentioned, you know, I was thinking a lot about the triangle of constraints that has come up a few times, and you know, we realize that trying to do this work ourselves has its limitations, and also its challenges in relation to digital preservation. In terms of that triangle, I mean, the big drawback is that we're really slow. It takes a long time to get the work done. But what I will say is that the quality of the transfers is very high. And I really don't believe that there's a vendor that we could be sending this stuff to who would take the same kind of care at this scale. Because in my experience, you end up with either a lot of work done at a sort of okay standard, or one or two pieces at a time at a very high standard. So we're trying to, you know, make those choices very consciously and admit the fact that it is slow. And that can be hard in terms of, you know, most of our collections come from private collections, private collectors and donors. And it's difficult for people to understand why, you know, their collection might be in a queue and a backlog that could take 2 years. You know, and it's not uncommon for me to tell people from day one, you know, that's kind of minimum time. On the other side too, I was thinking a lot about all these concerns that our colleagues who are here from the US are having, and you know, ways that we can support each other. And this whole idea of the artist and archivist in residence space, you know, one of the goals here is to hope that because we own the equipment and we have the skills in-house, that, for example, a collection from a rural archive or library where they might not have the skills, we could invite them to come stay in the muse, bring their collections, learn with us, and then you know, get an outcome that they wouldn't be able to achieve otherwise, and probably do it with very little talk about money. So, you know, there are creative ways that we can think about supporting each other. Suppose also, before I finish up, yeah, one of the biggest challenges, you know, we're talking about bottlenecks. It's amazing for us to have a cataloging bottleneck. I think it's a terrific problem to have, right? Because that means that I get to go argue for hiring catalogers. And it means that we're doing our job right. But it also means that there are way more digital files, and that has meant that we've had to put in new IT infrastructure, develop new strategies about, you know, digital preservation, because at this scale it's tough. But yeah, I suppose I conclude by just saying I don't think building digitization labs like this is right for everyone, but for us, it's been really successful. And there have been hidden costs that we didn't expect, but a lot of great benefits as well. So if anybody wants to talk further about that, we're here to talk about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much to Adam and Gerard, or Adam and Irla. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, but please do reach out to them during the break and during the day. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to speak with you. Once again, thank you, Adam and Irla. I'd like to welcome on stage Maya Bonek next. He will be discussing archive film restoration, genuine blotch detection in archive films through small neural network approaches and conventional image processing techniques.
This presentation is on archive film restoration, and I know this is a very long time, but this talk is essentially about loss detection in film. I also want to thank my supervisor, Cochran, for making this research possible. So all films degrade over time, mainly because of projector wear and poor storage conditions. So this leads to defects like blotches, scratches, and warping, which disrupt the viewing experience. So traditionally, restorers fix these issues manually, frame by frame, which, as you can imagine, is extremely slow. So that's why researchers have developed automated detection methods, first using image processing algorithm, and more recently with machine learning models. But here's the challenge. Simply detecting a black spot in one frame isn't enough. Why? Because sometimes that black spot is actually part of the original scene. So the way we decide whether it's a blotch or not is by looking at the frames before and after. So dirt or damage is stuck to the film itself, so it won't appear in the exact same position across multiple frames. So for example, in this frame, the red circle highlights the real blotch. Notice how it doesn't appear in the previous n-1 or the next n+1 frame. And meanwhile, the green circle looks like a blotch, but it's actually part of the scene since it shows up in the same place in the neighboring frame. So for image processing approaches, several algorithms have been developed over the years since the 1990s, and all are based on pixel differences between frames. And the best performing algorithm at the time is called Spike Detection Index P, or SDIP, which was introduced by Cochran in 1990. And it works by using something called displaced pixel differences, or DPDs. In simple terms, this compares the intensity of a pixel in the current frame with the corresponding pixel in a reference frame. So it could, so based on the motion estimation. So if there's a sudden change in intensity, it could indicate a blotch. So you can have more details on that on the book by Cochran, published in 1998, just to consider. So here's on the right, the R curve compares these algorithms. The vertical axis shows the correct detection rate, and the horizontal axis shows the false alarm rates. So the more you go toward the upper left, the better performance is. So you can see that NTIP marked with an X provides a better balance between detecting real blotches and avoiding false alarms. In contrast, the original SDIE marked with a plus consequence. And more recently, researchers have also turned to machine learning for blotch detection. So machine learning is a branch of what we commonly call artificial intelligence. So in that, one of the most widely used models for images is the convolutional neural network, or CNN. So CNN is designed to automatically extract and learn spatial features from images. So that makes it very powerful for tasks like image classification and segmentation, which is exactly what we need for detecting blotches. And in our research, we focused on a particular type of CNN, which is called UNIT. So, simply, UNIT is especially good for image segmentation because its architecture captures both the fine details and the overall context of the image. So that makes it a very strong candidate for separating blotches from real image contents. So the model has two main paths, an encoding path and a decoding path. So in the encoding path, it compresses the image to capture the broader context. Then, in the decoding path, it expands the image again, bringing back the fine details that were lost during decompression. So another important part of any deep neural network is the loss function. So this is basically how the model measures how far off its projections are from real data. So you can think of it like a narrow score. So the higher the loss, the worse the model is performing. So during the training, the goal is to minimize this loss so the model gradually becomes more accurate. So there are many types of loss functions, but for a classification task like loss detection, the most common one is cross-entropy loss. It's especially effective when the model has to decide between categories. In our case, whether it's something belongs to a blotch or to the original image. So in previous notable research, Arthur Rondeau applied the UNIT model for defect detection. And unlike most public studies, his work used data sets with genuine defects, and the results were questionable. However, there were still some challenges. In particular, motion composition wasn't applied, which caused issues in certain scenes. And like most deep neural networks, the model required very high computational power compared to conventional algorithms. So our goal, therefore, was to design a smaller deep neural network that could still detect real blotches with fewer training samples. So we wanted to push the performance using machine learning without relying on pre-trained networks, which were often used in previous research. So using specific training samples is especially important. Practice, a restore might manually restore just a few frames, and those restored frames can then be used to train the model. After that, the model can automatically restore the remaining frames. This approach also addresses copyright concerns because the training only uses frame restored by the restorer themselves and not from someone else's work. So for this research, we prepared 3 different input data sets. So the first is set data, which is an uncompressed format and served as our high-quality baseline. The second is carrier, which is compressed but still maintains relatively high resolution. And finally, we have night, which is a heavily compressed file with a much smaller resolution. By using these 3 data sets, we were able to test our model under very different conditions, from high quality film scan all the way down to low resolution, highly compressed video. And the next step was to prepare the differentiator for training. So first, we need to find where the blotches are in each one of the frames. Here's one frame example for the sensitive frame. So once the blotches are identified, we mask the blotch in white using any photo editing tool like Photoshop, Pixelmator, or whatever photo editing tool to add the white mask. So next, we add a black background behind the scene and to add the related blotches clearly. So we repeated this process for each frame for our 3 data sets for this research. So we did that 468 frames in total. And that actually took a lot of time to do this. So as mentioned earlier, one of our experiments was to analyze the effect of motion compensation. So to do this, we used the compositing software Foundry Mutex to compute both the motion compensation and the display pixel differences, DPs. So for illustration purposes, the red arrows show the direction and magnitude of pixel displacement between frames. So this helps visualize how pixels move from one frame to the next, which is very important for accurately detecting the blotches. So once the input data is prepared, we can run the algorithm. So first we apply the traditional SDIP method. So this shows the different frames. This is different thresholds. And then we, by testing different thresholds, we can observe that how the algorithm performs changes with different sensitivity settings. And when it comes to the deep neural network, there are a few key points to keep in mind. The main question we wanted to answer was how many input frames are needed to train the network so we can automatically detect blotches on unseen frames. So this is crucial because it determines how much manual work a restorer needs to do before the system can take over and run automatically. Training on use frames that the restorer has already manually restored. So when training a model, we usually split the data into 3 sets: training, validation, and tests. So the validation set is used to fine-tune the model's parameters and help prevent overfitting. But in this experiment, I actually like overfitting because it lets me clearly see how the model learns from different amount of data. So to understand how the model behaves, we ran tests using 20%, 40%, 60%, and 80% of the input frames, all without applying motion compensation first. This way, we can clearly observe how the model's performance improves as more training data becomes available. So next, to perform the motion compensation, the network needs 3 frames: the previous frame, the current, and the next frames. So in practice, these 3 frames are converted to black and white, stacked together, and fed into the neural network. So this allows the network to encode temporal information, which is crucial for motion analysis. And remember, some features in a frame may look like a blotch, but aren't actual defects. So by analyzing multiple frames together, the network can distinguish real blotches from seen features. And finally, we wanted to test how cropping the frames affects computation power. And the approach is very simple. We just divide each frame into multiple small pieces like this. So by processing small region instead of the full frame, the model requires less memory and computation, which can significantly speed up processing. Since our goal was to have a small deep neural network, we aimed for a reduced number of parameters. In our case, we kept it as 3 million parameters. And as I said, we didn't use any pre-trained network because those models are typically much, much larger. Even the smallest versions have around 3.5 million parameters, and the average can go up to 92.6 million parameters, far beyond what we wanted for a lightweight model. Now, let's move on to our results. So here we compare the best performing SDIP algorithm at its optimal threshold with the best performing CNN, also at its optimal threshold training. So as you can see, the TNN's prediction are much closer to the ground truth. So the SDIP method can detect a blotch, but it doesn't fully cover it. So this compares for an uncompressed frame. So next we'll look at how the model performs on a compressed frame. We can see some clear differences here. So for the carrier frame, the SDIP algorithm performs poorly, generating many false positives. In contrast, EGN is much closer to the ground truth and clearly outperforms SDIP. So the same trait is observed with the night sequences, although there are still some false positives in the DNA results. So why might this be happening? Likely because these frames are heavily compressed and there's less information available compared to uncompressed frame. Even without mutation, the GNN still performs better than SDIP and is closer to the ground truth. This suggests that with further fine-tuning, the model can potentially perform even better. Next, let's look at the effect of using motion compensation. We found that motion compensation led to a significant improvement in detection accuracy across all datasets. So with synesthetic datasets, the true positive rate TBR increased by 11%, and the false positive rate FPR dropped by 94%. For carrier, the TBR increased by 44%, the FPR dropped by 72%, and for night, TBR increased 25%, and FPR reduced by 20%. Now let's look at some visual results, starting with synesthetic, which contains uncompressed frames. As you can see, the version with motion compensation has far fewer false positive pixels compared to the version without it. In this example, the improvement is very clear. Motion compensation makes the detection much cleaner and closer to the ground truth. This shows how adding temporal information can significantly improve the quality of the blush detection. Now, let's look at the carrier and night sequences. For carrier, it's a bit hard to see on the screen, but the version with motion compensation still performs better than the one without it. There are fewer false positives, especially in the upper part of the frame. For the night sequence, motion compensation makes the blush mask more comprehensive. However, some false positives are still visible, like they do to the heavy compression and lower resolution of these frames. So, overall, motion compensation consistently improves detection, even on challenging and compressed data. Next, let's look at the effect of cropping the frame. By reducing the resolution to 320 by 240, we were able to significantly reduce memory usage. Full frame inputs required up to 38 gigabytes of RAM, while crop inputs required only 3.4 gigabytes of RAM. That's roughly 90% reduction. However, this comes with a slight trade-off in performance. Although the true positive rate for CNS improved by 1%, which is good, but the false positive rate increased by 88%. For carriers, similar trend, TBR increased by 3%, and the FPR increased to 78%. So, while cropping greatly reduces computational costs, it does add a small extent of some detection accuracy, especially in terms of false positive. So the natural question is, why does it happen? Well, during training, we injected the cropped parts of the frames randomly. So as a result, the network probably saw far more clean regions than regions containing blotches. So this imbalance made the learning process less effective. A straightforward solution is to sort the crop images into two groups, blotch and unblotch, and then train the network with a 50-50 balance approximately. So that way the model learns to recognize blotches more effectively, can make a better distinction during training it. So here we have the visual results of the crop frames shown at the bottom right. For instance, a visually reconstructed binary map is fairly close to the non-cropped version. However, it doesn't cover all blotches and doesn't reduce the number of false positives. So for the carrier sequences, the blotches are detected, but there are still many false alarms. So this may be because some of the blotches are very light in color and contrast, making them harder to distinguish in the low resolution approach. Finally, here are the RC curves for each sequence. So we've plotted different DNA version in green and the SDFP algorithm's performance in red. So remember, the higher we go on the y-axis and the further left we are on the x-axis, the better the performance. To give you a concrete example, let's consider a 4K image which has about 8.3 million-pixels. If our false positive rate is 10 to the power minus 5, that means around 80 pixels would be falsely detected as blotches. That's barely noticeable. But if the false positive rate increases to 10 to the power minus 1, we have more than 800,000 false detections, basically covering 10% of the image. So that's why keeping the curve to the left is so valuable. So overall, we can clearly see that the DNA models outperform the traditional SDIV algorithm. Among the sequences, synesthetic performs the best. This is likely because the blush colors are consistent and the frames are uncompressed, providing the network with higher quality information to work with. So to conclude, neural networks significantly outperform traditional algorithms even when trained with just 50 to 100 frames. That's roughly the number of frames that are required to have effective automatic blotches. And real blotches can be detected efficiently using lightweight models with fewer than 3 million parameters. And cropping frames and applying Gaussian compensation both help improve accuracy and detection. So future work could include data sorting, as I said, for crop frames, separating images into blush and non-blush to make learning more effective. In painting techniques for automated restoration of damaged frames, this is the natural next step for actively detecting the blushes. So this involves reconstructing the missing or corrupted region, and in blushes in this because we've been working on blushes. And traditional methods like medium filter have been used in the past, but these approaches often struggle with preserving fine details and handling high motion scenes. So diffusion models, that type of machine learning, are a promising approach as they are good at generating realistic and contextually coherent contents based on the inputs. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Yes.
Thank you so much, Neil. I think we have time for one question. There's a question in the audience or online. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering why you focus on blotches and not projection lines. I would think projection lines would be easier to detect.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, well, easy to do that. Because blush is more like small little dots in the frame, and that's scratches on the lines. And previous research, have been research on using detecting the lines, and a bit less on the blushes. So that's why we took the blush. And also, I don't know if it's easier for the scratches, but if it's easier, why I'm doing something a little bit hard as well.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And again, if you have any more questions or calls, please do reach out to me during the break or later during the day. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll be speaking about measuring the invaluable insights from the RTE audio digitization project. Please welcome Anya to the stage.
Hello everyone, thank you to No Time to Wait for the opportunity to present my public work here today on behalf of Ireland's public broadcaster radio and television. And audio preservation marks the new chapter in my career. My background is in moving image preservation and digital archiving, but sound has reshaped how I approach memory for this project. For the past 5 years, I had the opportunity to listen differently, not just to content, but to context, failure, and fragility. And I'm happy to share my experience and findings with you today. So our goal is to digitize, migrate, preserve, and make digitally accessible all these radio, broadcast, and music collections spanning from the 1920s to the 2000s. Recordings reach across genres such as current affairs, cultural events, news, sport, drama, education, concerts, and music, and there's of course really precious field recordings of the Irish language amongst the mix. These recordings exist primarily on two radio formats, 1-inch reel magnetic tape and optical disc carriers. Having already completed the migration of pay shell discs and lamps and cassettes, we have now completed the largest preservation effort today. And that can be measured in a couple of fun ways. So 80 years of podcast and music history, or 330,000 hours of content held on more than 182,000 physical objects. Made of organic and synthetic materials, and together they were 18 tons. The tapes on spool were probably spread over 40,000 kilometers, and digitally for this collection alone we faced 270 terabytes of audio or 1.8 million individual files and fully digitally. So when we talk about such volumes, we must consider being selective. Analog 1-inch reels, many of up to 70 years on age. Selection wasn't realistic for us. More than half had no digital catalog entry, relying on label information and context. Very few had reliable information on age, condition, or generation, and ways to evolve to streamline analytics. And with that level of uncertainty, everything becomes potentially unique. So we committed to mass digitization, photographing, and transcription labels along the way to rebuild our provenance. For data discs now entering their failure rate at around 20 years, we saw a similar instability. File structures varied, manifests were incomplete, and some content recorded with proprietary formats with no current software to open them. Again, the selective upgrades would cost more than digitizing outright, so the approach was to migrate all but some image with unique standard imaging. But for commercial music, this situation was a little bit different. Many recordings existed in multiple copies. So instead of digitizing everything, we focused on unique recordings, spending time selecting only the copy for preservation. So this approach for us balances risk, cost, and sustainability while ensuring we don't lose irreplaceable podcast history to our touring action or turn our future systems with unnecessary toll. So to talk a little bit about skills, when I joined this project 4 years ago, the strongest foundation in the team was in physical asset archiving, knowing how to integrate legacy collections, stabilize tapes, clean mold, and treat fragile carriers to prevent further damage. I was fortunate to have a project assistant whose background was in logistics and heavy machinery, someone who had joined us Nobel before and was mostly intimidated by moving 80 tons of fragile carriers ever so gently. For example, the tape you can see on the left, which is known as a pancake, rather than a sandwich stool, needed to be cushioned to be removed. But once the goal shifted from preserving the object to preserving the signal digitally, our traditional toolkit was no longer enough. The team had to upskill very quickly on digital preservation workflows, metadata standards, automated quality control, checks on verification, risk assessment across systems all over the shelves. We had to design repeatable pipelines, not just one digitization. To make that pipeline function, we had to prepare, assess, document, tag, track, and verify every carrier before and after digitization. The actual digitization of the coding shapes and this migration was outsourced to a specialized audio visualization team at Picture BV under the watchful eye of senior audio engineer Peter Bokatov in the Netherlands, who handled transfers on calibrated professional equipment. But outsourcing didn't mean stepping back. It meant stepping up in a different way, meticulous planning, thorough testing that every building block you see here was equipped with guidelines, procedures, and built around best practice in health and safety and conservation. Every task was timed by the second to allow for seamless integration with the order. And that kind of so-called just-in-time operation comes with a lot of pressure and it doesn't go well with unexpected. So for us, that came in the form of major mold outbreak in one of our walls, likely caused by the organic adhesive in certain BSF tape boxes. So not actually, they taped the tape boxes, which for us were very valuable because they contained metadata. Please watch out for the black ones. Like I think I can blame a little bit also of faulty articulation unit, which up and down was kind of observed during the COVID-19 lockdown. So overnight project shifted from spreadsheets and workflows to PPE, respirators, containment protocols, paper conservation procedures, and memorably this element that was exciting. That combination, I think, of analog craft, digital discipline, and industrial pragmatism is what made this project work. Yeah, so those kind of skills are kind of not learned in workshops. I think maybe 2 workshops, but I think the capability really is shaped through crisis, improvisation, and collaboration. Not about skills, a little bit more about our statement of works with the vendor and focusing on quality assurance for now. Our technology stack was designed for precision and repeatability. The transfers were carried out on 15 student-made machines, all of the same age approximately, with new heads. They were systematically calibrated and maintained for consistent playback across thousands of tapes. The analog signal was captured through high-speed converters and ingested directly into a quadriga system with control capture and monitoring. We captured a broadcast file at 96 kilohertz 24-bit with embedded metadata such as text originators and unique identifiers, including legacy identifiers. Each carrier was photographed at high resolution to retain its physical identity. And alongside the audio was built Alongside audio, we will structure governance documentation, formal digitization histories, condition notes, quality control reports, and label transcription. So quality assurance wasn't just an absence for us, it was embedded end to end. Before shipment, every carrier was barcoded and registered into our internal tracking system. It sounds kind of fancy, it was kind of an spreadsheet and transfer underwent automated and manual treatment checks, both picture rate and again RC return. Package completeness, metadata integrity, and audio fidelity were verified systematically. So in short, preservation wasn't just about pressing a record, it was a tidy engineering collaboration between machines, metadata, and human oversight. And one of my favorite successes in this project was the discovery of a failure. So during a review, we caught an anomaly, not just on the structural form, not on the waveform, but actually in the spoken word. It was kind of a sharp momentary peak. You could only detect it at the end of a sentence or a word, so I can't even imitate it. But so that was triggering. No standard alerts for trigger to that, but the human ear obviously instantly reacted to that. So once we had that pattern recognized, we trace it back. And because we logged the machine, the serial number for every transfer, we could also pinpoint the exact source. The reason for it was that the attention on one of the pseudo machines had on the screen. And thanks to that maintenance log we were able to ring fence over 400 affected tapes and we schedule them for recapture. So that's kind of a bit of a reminder that even with great automation and analytics, we must maintain for patient listening in such large processes. Oh yeah, it's a 2 by. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. I have a couple of theories when I was presentations. Share with you. With the model documenting failure to preserve integrity, we have invested heavily in quality reporting, tracking both manual interventions and machine detected faults across every transfer. So our operator notes include table pairs, elevators, speed deviations, 40 outputs, walked and rerun rails, channel index deviations, which indicate where we detected motor imbalance or channel recordings, so where recordings like forward, back, or left only or right only, nav curve and recordings through the IC. We find residues, deletion tapes, and those who are automated flags include home clicks and log clipping, not oriented. And effort review and share findings with you. It was 64,000 tapes stored in stable condition, not climatized. Please keep in mind island has tropical conditions. Almost 50% showed minor plug issues such as beat fluctuations or channel imbalances. And the around 4% triggered 40 error notes. Only 0.16 virtually unrecoverable due to severe damage like mold or minor failure. Also like they're just stopped. So overall, the physical media have held up much better than expected, especially considering their age, which was a minimum 20 years and at a maximum 8 years for our holdings. So in 2 months, it's very that most of our holdings were professional recordings and not like as amateur recordings were found on an average. But I think the real risk, as we have learned in this conference, is time. Playback data depends on machines that are no longer manufactured, maintained by a dwindling number of experts, and operated by even fewer trained specialists. But I'm really glad that it was is going along that train and to maintain that expertise. Across Europe, we have found that service provider landscape appears to be less competitive than when we started this project. That means that future projects of this scale will take longer to achieve and consequently cost substantially more to digitize. Let me quickly give you an update about our optical disk findings. So from a requirement perspective, we were dealing with forming formats, CDDA, standard graphical audio, CD5, which is a hybrid multimedia disk, CDR, and DVD data disks. I want to acknowledge Manish Bagu for publication and optical media preservation strategy for NUI, which arrived at my desk at a really good time to be upscale. Our scale was 120,000, as I mentioned before, was achieved using 10 disk stackers with both skirting to Raspberry Pi, managing automated extraction, and incorporating audio copying process for micro standards. One of our key findings during testing was that around 20% of the data disks were initially unreadable, simply because they had never been properly finalized. So rather than treat that as a failure, we brought into our workflow adding logic to detect unfinalized disks and process them accordingly. So across our optical collections, the most reliable formats were actually the CDDAs, the first design for mass production. Most of them got successfully after 1 or 2 retries, unless they were really much to bits. CDI hyperdiscs were never well documented to begin with, and demanded intervention, so we had to describe imagery, but the audio instructions still achievable with very low area. By contrast, the CDRs were consistently the most unstable. The organic dye-based recording layers are chemically volatile, and they deteriorate faster than factory test media, particularly when exposed to light or stored in warmer environments. To give you a sense of failure patterns, we observed the most common condition and issues found in 2 categories: mechanical decay, so discord, layer separation, warping, fractals, or bouncing, which you see in the image here. We also found several discs suffering from reflective layer failure caused by low-grade manufacturing rather than full storage. So you can see a natural disk action. Usually data integrity issues for we couldn't completely read the disk because we had quite a level of corruption in one of them, so we opted to take the residue files and turn into a gap analysis. So to conclude, despite the optical media isn't technology, we still have excellent open source software, DD Rescue, Isoblaster, except audio copy, all perfectly capable of large-scale migration. Like every year that we delay, more distinct from readable scrapper to not if not all through the chemical delay. So if magnetic tape preservation is about against obsolete machinery, optical is a risk against chemistry. Before I move to questions, I just wanted to use a few outcomes and what's next. Our work was recognized by VIA Excellence Awards for Media Preservation, which was a really proud moment for the team. Dublin City University, where we have been building an Irish dialect repository, was directly from our newly digitized archive. And so here are selected recordings of unique Irish dialects, largely tagged, voice matched, and transcribed, turning our broadcast history into linguistic and cultural data. Very you should go check it out. It's community.id is a fantastic resource. Looking ahead, this work that I just mentioned will feed into our legacy interpretation strategy, where we hope to apply bilingual transcription to radically improve search and accessibility across Irish and English. On the infrastructure side, our next priorities are full integration into RTE's media management system, which we didn't have in place at the time. Digitization, you might think more interesting. There's a lot of additional stories as well, which I hope physical storage for digitized carriers is next as well. So this year my warranty is up, so all digitized carriers will come back to valid. And importantly, planning for the migration of our remaining audio collections, which is really a broad mix of formats. Thank you for the blogging presentation workshop. Thank you so much, and I have to take some questions.
Always a pleasure to speak about your work. Do we have any questions in the audience or online?
Marcus.
A great presentation. I wanted to know if you have published data on the rate failures specifically.
Yes, I can get that isolated, yeah, but they were the highest ones. So if you all failure or critical list is 5%, we were probably around 3.5. I can send you the isolated one. We did invest heavily on comments for coordination, but like with every macro comment is cost involved. For coordination, that really helps us to bring things where we may have to re-digitize, but for this, we didn't go do that effort. Like we just said, like it was completely digitized, only partly digitized. And the findings that I have, they are really from the test case, to see where the errors came from.
Any more questions?
So I, could you talk us through, like, what was the process of the upskilling you had to do coming from all the film background, but then moving into more digital? It sounds like you went pretty deep in logistical and the physical carrier side of things here for specifically magnetic audio and optical.
Well, transitioning is quite a process. So even the logistical side of things wasn't something that we had done on that scale. So it was like a collaboration between all the different departments. We have specialized cataloging units. The catalogers were like subject matter experts. They were also listening to content every day. So they were my kinetics for QC. But like in terms of digital preservation strategies like checksums and etc. like that, I was working very closely with the technology department. Basically, incorporating, how can I put this best, like it's not all open source there, you see, so we have to sometimes piggyback on transporting and tools in order to get that data in there. So it was more like a second department where I had to upskill in digital preservation. Not that I don't have like digital media expertise, but it's the difference in digital preservation expertise, where we had to kind of flag basically and kind of measures like how can we automate this in an industrial transcoding engine, how we we have to bit that and other kind of properties, and how do we manifest that, and how do we raise the flags. Obviously, all of this would have been a little bit easier if we had the management system in place. But I think, as I said before, it's in that kind of innovation and process that you are still very great things. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, but yeah.
Thank you once again to Anya Mahler for her. We are going to break now until, is it 10 past 11 or 5 past 11, will we say? If you can aim to be back here maybe around 11:05, 11:10. And the coffee and pastries are in the same room as they were in yesterday. Thank you once again to all your speakers, and thank you to the audience.